of information verified by the surveillance and communication mechanism, as well as the conclusion and implementation of action plans in order to put an end to these violations. We also insist as well as mechanisms for notification and response, as well as the effective implementation of the principles and commitments stemming from Paris, Vancouver, and the Declaration on conclude, Madam President, the DRC reaffirms that protecting children in armed conflicts constitutes a legal obligation, a moral imperative, children, and to ensure that the perpetrators of grave violations are accountable for their actions. I thank you. I thank the representative of the DRC.
Made that message clear when she presided over this council in March, drawing vital attention to the devastating toll that global conflict takes on children. Children in conflict zones around the world face many threats. In the DRC, millions of children endure the threat of violence, forced displacement, and conflict-related sexual violence from an array of armed actors. We strongly condemn that violence, and under President Trump, the United States continues to prioritize bringing peace. Of course, we cannot discuss We call on both sides to continue peace talks and underscore the need for Russia, to please return these children. I'm so sorry about that. In Haiti, gang violence and endemic impunity rob Haitian children of their futures. The United Gang Suppression Force, which represents this Security Council's commitment to assisting the Haitian government in countering these gangs. Children are not mere casualties caught in the crossfire. They reliable or safe education, blocking access to opportunity, and depriving them of their future. As we all know, the result can be a cycle of poverty and instability that spans generations, which fuels further conflict safeguard our collective future and help to end enduring conflicts. Regrettably, the UN Secretary General's latest report on children in armed conflict brings us armed groups is a grave violation. The incidental killing of civilians by state armed forces is not. This report is yet another example of the UN spending time and resources on initiatives incompatible with member states' interests and sovereignty. This report only reinforces the United States' decision to cease participation in the Office of the Special Representative for CAC. The report only further damages CAC's credibility by falsely equating the actions of U.S. and armed conflict. This will not happen with the publication of politicized and inaccurate reports. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I now give the floor to the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Благодарю вас, господин.
For their contribution to this discussion. The situation of children in armed conflict around the world continues to worsen. For the third consecutive year, this blood-curdling ranking has been topped by the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Violations against children in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict continue despite the declaration of a ceasefire. Since October 2025, in Gaza alone, 265 Palestinian children have been killed. In other words, one child has died every day for more than 8 months. More than 400 children have been wounded, many with injuries that they will never fully recover from. Hundreds require urgent medical evacuation. More than 600,000 school-aged children remain without consistent access to in-person education. Approximately 93% of school buildings need to be fully rebuilt or require major repairs. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, boys and girls are killed or maimed every single day. And in Lebanon, like in Gaza, we are speaking of periods during which a ceasefire was formally declared. The escalation in the Middle East this year has also taken a heavy toll on Iranian children. We mourn the victims of the tragedy in Manab and all others who have died as a result of the aggression perpetrated by Israel and the US. We hope that the conclusion of a memorandum of understanding between the United States and Iran will contribute to a lasting and long-term stabilization of the situation in the Middle East. Are falling victim to Ukrainian attacks on an almost daily basis. The Secretary General attributes only 9 cases of grievous bodily harm and 3 killings of children to Ukraine. Meanwhile, only in the last week alone, from June 15th to June 21st, 291 civilians suffered from Ukrainian armed forces attacks. 250 were wounded, including On June 15th, a 1-year-old child was injured in Tula as a result of an attack on residential buildings. On June 17th in Bryansk Oblast, a tragedy befell the members of a football team from the Gomel region of Belarus. A Ukrainian drone struck the bus on which the children were traveling. There were 44 people on board, of Bryansk region. A kamikaze drone struck a car carrying a mother with her 2 daughters aged 10 and 11. Both girls were wounded and hospitalized. One of them is in serious Central District Hospital in the city of Vasilyevka in Zaporizhia Oblast, damaging the windows of the children's clinic. The entrance to Hola Priestin, the UAF attacked a medical vehicle belonging to Oleshki Hospital. The 3-person crew was killed. In Kakhovka, the UAF struck a clinic building. On February 11th, 2026, in the Luhansk People's Republic, drone strikes in the Svatove district wounded 5 people. An enemy drone attacked an ambulance as the medical crew was returning from a call. On February 22nd, 2026, in Bryansk Oblast, the UAF attacked the village of Ponurivka in the Sterdub municipal of Dnipro Hospital. As a result of the drone attack, an ambulance was damaged in the village of Vodyane while en route to an emergency call. On March 5th, 2026, in the Donetsk People's Republic, an ambulance was damaged in a drone strike. On March 8th, 2026, in Belgorod Oblast, in the village of Zamostie, a UAF drone deliberately struck an ambulance. The 50 medical personnel were inside. The attack killed 8 people, wounded 10 more, and caused the hospital building to collapse. On March 10th, 2026, attacked the grounds of the Vasilyevka District Hospital. They carried out 5 targeted strikes and attempted to attack emergency services during the evacuation and response efforts. On March 16th, 2026, in Kherson Oblast in Novokakhovka, a drone dropped munition damaged an ambulance. Debris from the downed drones fell on a medical center. On March 24th, 2026, in Zaporizhia Oblast in the Vasilyevka Municipal District, the UAF attacked an ambulance and a civilian healthcare facility. An armed drone struck the building. On 26 March 2026, in Kherson Oblast, a Ukrainian drone attacked the grounds of the Kakhovka Central District Hospital. On March 31st, 2026, in Zaporizhia Oblast, the grounds of Vasilyevka Central Hospital came under UAF fire, and an ambulance carrying a medical crew was attacked. On April 6, 2026, in Belgorod Oblast, a UAF attack damaged an ambulance. On April 10th, 2026, in Zaporizhia Oblast, a UAF attack damaged the roof of the emergency admissions building of the Kamyansky Dniprovsky Central District Hospital. On April 13th, 2020, UAF attack damaged a city hospital. On April 28, 2026, in Zaporizhia Oblast, a UAF strike damaged the central hospital. On May 9th, 2020, all this data will be reflected in the 2026 report. Madam President, we have CRC. On June 6th, we transmitted to the Secretariat through the Information Center in Moscow terrorist act. We did so as part of the verification process and are ready to organize a visit by an authorized UN of Kiev and its accomplices. We would like to recall in this connection Resolution 2601, adopted by consensus on October 29th, 2021, which decisively condemns attacks and threats of attacks on schools. Ukraine is among its co-sponsors, as are the United Kingdom, Greece, Denmark, and France. We would like to bring to the attention of these countries that since 2014, the Kiev regime has attacked 2,116 educational institutions. This includes kindergartens, schools, and colleges. This is the reality that you do not wish to see. Madam President, and civilian vehicles. These actions are not aimed at gaining a military advantage, but rather at terrorizing the civilian population. This tactic indicates that the Kiev regime, which is suffering defeats on the battlefield, is increasingly resorting to announced its cooperation with Ukrainian manufacturers. It is notable that this is a company with a long history. Among other things, it supplied equipment to the Wehrmacht during the Second World War. Again, only days ago, Paris hosted Eurosatory 2026, the world's largest arms expo, to display the support for Ukraine's military efforts. Thus, European countries are an accomplice in the killing of children in Russia. Madam President, the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces constitute a path taken. Here, I would like to stress that in 2025, the reporting period covered by the report under discussion today, at least 293 minors were affected by criminal acts committed by the Ukrainian side. 22 of those children were killed and 271 were wounded. The youngest victim was buried solely on the basis of the nominal signing of a joint plan of action with the organization. This is evidently one of the weaknesses of the mandate, and it requires rethinking. The failure to respond to Kiev's crimes encourages impunity. This is the very impunity that every political declaration on the subject of this mandate calls for combating. Madam President, Russia has always been and remains open to engagement on child-related issues with all constructively minded international the true picture of violations occurring in its context. The cases attributed to Russia in the report originate from the OHCHR's Kiev-based unit, which is known for its bias and is essentially decided to once again repeat the known lies about the deportation of Ukrainian children. Everyone in this room knows that this is a lie. Every single UN body knows this is a lie, and everyone says this when the microphones are off, and Russia is waiting for the first person to say so with the microphone on. Madam President, in Russia, assistance to a pseudo-judicial body, namely the ICC. Nevertheless, the Russian Institution of Children's Rights Commissioners is continuing to function successfully despite external pressure at both the federal as well as regional levels. In border regions, citizens' concerns have shifted to restoring infrastructure, and a key challenge is organizing remote learning for children. Parents are requesting reliable devices and connectivity. In response, students are being provided with tablets, and blast-resistant film is being installed on the windows of schools. Another important aspect, one that is crucial in the city has launched a continuing education program that has already been completed by 100 experts from 26 regions. There is a webinar series entitled Teenagers in Combat Zones, as well as an online seminar rights commissioner together with an NGO and the Moscow State University of Psychology and Education. Russia is able to meet and is meeting the humanitarian needs of its population on its own territory through its own resources. Developing countries, however, are forced to rely on humanitarian support. And the volume of funds directed towards Ukraine on the one hand, and to Africa, the Middle East, and other regions on the other. As a result, these countries continue to face destruction of schools, armed group violence, and mass displacement have effectively deprived hundreds of thousands of children of access to education, as we heard today. It has been funded at only 10.6%. The comparable figure for Ukraine is humanitarian agenda more broadly must be among the priorities of the next UN Secretary General. There can be no progress in protecting children without substantial advances in this aspect. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Colombia for convening this open debate. I thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Children in Armed Conflict, Ms. Vanessa Fraser, and the Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Catherine Russell, for their valuable remarks. I also thank Mr. André Prosperi Raymond for his insightful contribution, and even more for his continuous work on children's protection in Haiti. Latvia welcomes the annual report of the Secretary General and expresses its utmost for grave violations against children remain widespread and deeply concerning. It is heartbreaking that as we mark 30 years of the CAC agenda, the UN has also verified the highest number of children affected since the establishment of the CAC mandate. For the first time, states, not non-state armed groups, are responsible for the majority of verified grave right to education must remain a priority. Attacks on education extend beyond physical attacks on educational facilities. In the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, Russia blatantly violates the rights of children by implementing re-education in (124 attacks on schools in total. In the occupied Palestinian territory, students have been affected by demolitions, military raids on schools, and detention while traveling to school. In Somalia, in Haiti, school closures coincide with the large-scale recruitment of children into armed gangs, where children now make up around 50% of members. For girls, the absence of school means increased risks of sexual and gender-based violence, including forced marriage. This is especially true in Afghanistan, where the Taliban have completely banned girls' education beyond the 6th grade. Second, effective monitoring and reporting are indispensable for responding to grave violations and ensuring accountability. The monitoring and reporting mechanism remains one of the most important tools available to the international. We therefore recognize the indispensable work of child protection actors on the ground, who continue to carry out their duties despite increasingly challenging circumstances and can also resume its work swiftly, receive pending country reports, issue conclusions, and make recommendations for the protection of children. We underline that the UN and independent human rights monitors must be granted immediate This is especially urgent in relation to Russia's unlawful deportation and forcible transfer of Ukrainian children, and its continued denial of access to Ukrainian hospitals, and the recruitment and use of children for sabotage activities by Russia. The CAC mandate is not only about identifying such violations, but about ending and preventing them, particularly when the perpetrator is a permanent member of the Security Council, the very body that mandated this discussion. These violations by Russia must stop. They must be fully documented, investigated, and the perpetrators and implemented. The Security Council has set clear expectations through its resolutions on prevention, monitoring, accountability, and the reintegration of children formerly recruited or used by armed actors. We call on all parties listed in the Secretary General's report for committing grave violations on engaging with the UN and adopt concrete, time-bound action plans to end and prevent such abuses. General Kofi Annan, who said, "There is no trust more sacred than the one the world holds with children. There is no duty more important than ensuring that their rights are respected." Unquote. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for his statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of China. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank SRSG Frazier and Executive Director Russell for their briefings. I have also listened carefully to the statement made by the representative of civil society. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the UN mandate on children and armed conflict. For 30 years, the international community has been improving child protection mechanisms. However, as we speak, despite repeated prohibitions, other regions, supports close monitoring of the situation on the ground and timely listing of additional perpetrators of violations against armed conflict must conduct in-depth discussions and take concrete and effective actions. The international community must make joint efforts to fulfill the unshakable moral responsibility for child protection. I will highlight 4 points. First, ceasefire and cessation of hostilities must be achieved to eliminate the security threats to children. Acts of violence against children. Parties to the conflict must strictly abide by international humanitarian law and the relevant Security Council resolutions, fulfilling their obligations for protecting civilians, children in particular. In the Middle East, Ukraine, Sudan, and other regions, conflicts have dragged on for too long. The international community should move beyond geopolitical maneuvering, reject unwarranted interference and pressure, push the parties to the conflict to end war and hostilities, and conduct dialogue and consultations with the view to bridging their differences and resolving conflicts by peaceful means. Second, rule of law must be strengthened to combat violations against children. The Security Council resolutions have clearly defined 6 categories of grave violations against children. To deter potential perpetrators and uphold the bottom line of human conscience. China appreciates and fully supports the work of SRSG Frazier, calls on all parties to the conflict to strengthen cooperation with the UN and formulate and implement action plans on child protection. Third, humanitarian operations to the best extent possible, with a view to ensuring prompt and smooth delivery of aid to children in conflict areas. China views positively the UN's protection of and support to over 13,000 children last year. At present, funding shortages have limited the UN's capability for humanitarian operations. The international community, traditional donors in particular, must honor their pledging commitments in earnest, while the UN agencies should actively explore more funding channels to secure more resources. Fourth, sustainable development must be promoted to consolidate the foundation for the growth and development of children. Development is a key to resolving the root causes of conflicts and achieving lasting peace. The international community should vigorously support the conflict-affected countries in strengthening their capacity for achieving nationally owned development, providing public to follow the people-centered approach and the philosophy of technology for good and for all, and use AI and other emerging technologies in a responsible manner to empower education for children in conflicts while proactively guarding against potential risks. President, China has been a consistent and staunch supporter to, advocate for, and participant in children's cause and other humanitarian causes. In 2024, China, together with ICRC and other international partners, launched the International Humanitarian Law Initiative, which aims at reaffirming the resolute commitment to IHL and has received positive responses from more than 100 countries. We hope to see more countries joining the initiative. Along with the international community, we stand ready to continue our tireless efforts to end wars and conflicts and to improve the well-being of children. Thank you.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to Liberia. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. And I join in thanking the distinguished and qualified briefers for their insightful and sobering update. Children must never be caught in the crossfire of adult decisions. Yet, in 2025, children suffered a record number of grave violations in armed conflict, a profound stain on our collective conscience. Children must be safe, where they learn, where they grow, and certainly where they seek care. Yet, in too many conflicts, as we've heard, schools, institutions meant to anchor communities and preserve the social fabric are being systematically attacked, occupied, or abandoned as children and teachers flee for their lives. We've even heard today of children being attacked in their homes. Attacks on schools are condemned by Security Council Resolution 2601, and education in emergencies that is torn apart. Protecting students, teachers, and facilities in conflict is a strict requirement of international humanitarian law and essential to any credible path toward recovery. In some contexts, children can access learning through online platforms. But in many African nations where resources are already scarce, each alternatives do not exist at scale and definitely not at all. That only 38% of Africa's population used the internet in 2024, the lowest rate globally due to prohibitive costs, low literacy, and rural access barriers. Attacks on education, therefore, deepen existing inequities and risk leaving an entire generation in Africa behind. Refusing to let this become the continent's permanent reality, Liberia has endorsed the Safe Schools Declaration, reaffirming that classrooms must never become battlegrounds. We have also joined the global initiative to galvanize political commitment to the international humanitarian law, including its work stream on protecting hospitals. We know again from our own history that safeguarding schools and healthcare is not merely the Children in Armed Conflict mandate delivers measurable results. It works. Through the monitoring and reporting mechanism, we receive UN-verified systematic and reliable information showing who is committing grave violations, where, and at what scale. Without this mechanism, this council will be operating in the dark on a critical question concerning the future of the world and certainly this council. The mandate also secures concrete outcomes, including the release and reintegration of thousands of children each year from armed forces and groups. Remarkably, as we've heard, over 13,000 children received protection or reintegration support in 2025. Children who otherwise might never have found their way home and to their parents. These are not abstract achievements, they are lives reclaimed, future reassured, and proof that multilateralism delivers. But, Madam President, this progress is not guaranteed. Implementing the CAC mandate requires a sustained presence on the ground. And presence requires resources. UNICEF has sounded the alarm, again, including today. Impending donor cuts are already strangling operations and forcing impossible choices. To conclude, Madam President, the question before us is not where resolve to preserve the tools that allow this council to protect children in conflict, to respond and properly answer the question as we believe we can and we should. We must defend the CAC's mandate independence, protect its political integrity, and guarantee its sustainable funding, especially now when needs are skyrocketing. Investing in their safety, education, and reintegration is a direct investment in our shared global peace and future. Let's do it. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Liberia for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank the Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict, Ms. Vanessa Frazier, as well as the Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Catherine Russell, for their briefings that have shared some very precise information with us and are very rigorous. I also thank our civil society briefer for a very moving testimony. As we mark the 30th anniversary of the Children in Armed Conflict mandate, the Secretary General's report establishes a reality that is difficult to hear, but one that is grounded in facts. The scale of grave violations against children is unprecedented. And for the first time, it is government forces that are responsible for the majority of violations committed against children. For France, the Children in Armed Conflict mandate represents a rigorous, proven methodology and objective assessment grounded in an operational tool and an obligation to act decisively. The monitoring and reporting mechanism is at the heart of the mandate. It rigorously and impartially documents cases of violations of children's rights in situations of armed conflict. France supports this mechanism, for example, by funding its implementation by UNICEF, in particular in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Where they exist, peace operations are essential to the collection of reliable and objective data. France attaches great importance to ensuring that in a context of budgetary constraints, the child protection components of these operations be preserved in their design and the mandate. This rigorous methodology makes it possible to establish facts that are not the product of political bias, but that are well-grounded in facts. Thus, in Ukraine, children have been suffering for more than 4 years from the consequences of Russia's illegal aggression. We once again call on Russia attention away from this unpleasant truth by questioning and accusing France, among others. Violations committed against Palestinian children account for nearly 1/3 of the violations verified in the report. We call on Israel as the occupying power to take all necessary measures to protect Palestinian civilians and especially children. In Haiti, children who make up nearly half of gang members are the primary victims of armed group violence. On the basis of these irrefutable findings, the Council must act decisively. First, impose sanctions on the armed groups and forces responsible for these violations. Second, require that parties to conflicts respect international humanitarian law in all circumstances, all the more so with respect to children, for whom the 1949 Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols provide more than 110 states have joined. France is committed to producing concrete measures to improve the implementation of this special protection in conflicts. Thirdly, parties do more to support national judicial institutions and, where appropriate, international jurisdictions, including the International Criminal Court, in accordance with the principle of complementarity. Madam President, child protection is the responsibility of all states. France calls on all states to subscribe to the Paris principles and commitments launched jointly by France and UNICEF, which have already been supported by 115 states and whose 20th anniversary we will celebrate in February 2027. The protection of children in armed conflict is too grave a matter to lend itself to estimates or accusations of bias. France fully supports the realities are as troubling as the one we are addressing today. Violations against children are a shock to the human conscience. On this 80th anniversary of the Human Charter, the mobilization of the Council around this topic is a priority. Thank you.
At the outset, we thank the briefers for their comprehensive presentation. This year's report lays a bare and unfortunate truth. Across conflict, the protection of children cannot depend on nationality, geography, or politics. Every child in every conflict zone deserves the same rights to life, must address the root causes fueling conflict and upending children's lives. Children must never be subjugated to the horrors of armed conflict. Conflicts rarely erupt independency and global economic system that perpetuates inequality. When societies are denied the chance to prosper, children pay the steepest price as they tend to be deprived and ensuring fair access to technology and opportunity. Second, accountability and respect for international law must be absolute. Schools raided or destroyed, access to aid blocked, and over 17,000 students impacted. Palestinian children continue to face violence, sexual abuse, starvation, and trauma, with dozens killed and hundreds injured since 2025. Those perpetrators must be held accountable. Children protection must be central to national policies and peace efforts, with safeguards for education embedded in ceasefires and humanitarian agreements. Teachers, communities, and civil societies must help design and oversee these protections. We must confront the growing risks posed by new technologies and methods of warfare, from drones and AI-driven targeting and surveillance. Social media is being used to incite violence and recruit children, while technological advances remain under human control and legal oversight. As conflict invades classrooms, communities, and digital spaces, children, whether physically and psychologically, more vulnerable to face unprecedented threats. Robust protection mechanisms are more essential than ever, and prevention to break cycles of violence and to rebuild societies. To conclude, our delegation reaffirms its commitment to protecting children in armed conflict. The Council must act with urgency, consistency, and humanity so that the children of Palestine and all children affected by conflict are not remembered as victims of our inaction, but as a generation finally protected and empowered to build peace and a better future for all. I thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I'd like to thank the special representative of the Secretary General for Children in Armed Conflict, Ms. Vanessa Fraser, and the Executive Director the very sensitive functions of your respective mandates. And we would like to especially thank Mr. Andre Prosperi Raymond, the National Director of Plan International Haiti, for his statement today, where, as the representative fit in a report. Not because they are not precise, but because they reflect tragedies that no number can fully express. Nevertheless, the Secretary General's report, to which our briefers have referred, is eloquent by quoting these conflicts are happening where these violations against the human rights of boys and girls have happened. And the X-ray shown in this report is dramatic and, frankly, conflicts affecting over 24,000 boys and girls. This is the highest number registered ever since this mandate has existed. Panama has the deep conviction that protecting children is not a and the principles that gave birth to it, without political agendas or selective biases. And if international humanitarian law and the international human rights law, as well as the Convention on the Rights of the Child, mean anything at all, they should mean a school into military barracks, a hospital into a target, or hunger into a method of war. Madam President, the Secretary General's report are not just committed by non-state armed actors, but increasingly so, they are committed by state armed forces. And Current conflicts are increasingly entering in spaces where children should be more or the most protected. War is not somewhere far away. Advances and digital spaces can amplify the risks to which they are exposed, including emerging forms of recruitment, manipulation, and exploitation. In the face of this reality, Panama reaffirms that protecting education is protecting one of the first lines of defense for children. A safe school does not just preserve learning, it offers protection, stability, and hope. It is the place where a child receives a book instead of a weapon, and where they can imagine a future that is different from the one imposed by war. Therefore, Panama wanted to put this issue front and center of its action in the Security Council. We led the area formula on safe on the use of emerging technologies and their potential impact on the recruitment of boys and girls. And we did this because conflicts that new technologies are redefining the way in which hostilities develop. And this raises serious concerns on their impact on children. The growing use of unmanned systems, drones, weaken that does not weaken the protections that international law bestows upon children. And the question that we should ask is not what can these should ever cross. No technological advancement can be above our legal and moral obligation of protecting children. Madam President, our country has 4 life and death. Second, schools should remain outside of the conflict. No military target can justify a strike against a school or its declaration. Third, we must reaffirm a fundamental principle. Children recruited or used by armed groups or armed forces. Fourth, reintegration should be financed as a peace and security priority. In 2025, over 13,000 children that were formerly associated with armed groups or armed forces received leaving an armed group can become simply a pause, not a new life. Madam President, This debate cannot just become an annual repetition of pain. It should be a turning point, because a child that is recruited is not just a tiny soldier. It is a childhood stolen. A girl abused is Panama believes in those limits. It believes in the law. It believes in the responsibility of this council, but above all, it believes that we still have time to choose what kind of that we listened to their testimonies and we continued with business as usual. Let it not be said that children asked for protection and the council responded with silence. Ultimately, this debate is not just about protecting children from war. It is about protecting humanity from
And let me also begin by thanking Special Representative Fraser, Executive Director Russell, and Mr. Raymond for their valuable contributions. Madam President, over the past 3 decades, this Council has built a strong institutional framework to protect children from the horrors of armed conflict. It lays the foundation for a robust structure that documents and verifies delivers a stark indictment. As we've heard this morning, 2025 was the most dangerous year on record for children caught in conflict. More than 24,000 violations were recorded, each statistic a childhood robbed and a future of a widening gap between commitments made and commitments met. Madam President, our briefers have clearly reminded us that children continue to pay the highest price in conflicts around the world. In Ukraine, children are killed and maimed by Russian missile and drone children face grave risk from widespread violence, forced displacement, recruitment and use by armed actors, and severe food insecurity. And in Gaza, we're alarmed that, according to UNICEF, even after the ceasefire last October, 1 child is killed every day on average. In Haiti, children are recruited in mass by gangs, and sexual violence is used as a tactic to terrorize communities. The list, unfortunately, goes on. Madam President, to reverse this insidious trend, children must never be recruited or used, subjected to sexual violence, abducted, or arbitrarily deprived of liberty. Second, the scale of documented violations demands renewed effort to ensure accountability. Accountability is essential, not only to deliver justice for victims, but to prevent future violations. We need more than words. We need concrete measures, including credible investigations, prosecution of perpetrators, and the implementation of action plans. Third, in Afghanistan, now entering its 5th year. The ban is part of a broader system of institutionalized, gender-based oppression and domination that must end immediately. Every child has the right to learn, grow, and build their future without fear of violence or harm. Schools, children, and teachers must be protected from armed conflict to ensure safe, uninterrupted education for all. We call on all states to fully implement existing commitments and obligations, including the Safe School Declaration and psychosocial support. Protecting healthcare workers means protecting children. It must remain a priority. Fourth, Madam President, in the face of such horrific findings, support for the Special Representative, her office, the monitoring and reporting mechanism is more important than ever. The monitoring and reporting mechanism follows a rigorous and respond to violations. We cannot allow this to happen. For this reason, Denmark continues to financially support the Office of the SRSG and UNICEF. Concerned that for the first time, government forces were responsible for the majority of verified violations. This underscores the importance of maintaining an impartial, evidence-based listing process and ensuring that all listed parties, whether state or non-state actors, engage with the United Nations to develop and implement action plans. Madam President, in closing, 30 years after the creation that is applied consistently across all situations without exception. Denmark stands ready to work with all partners to this important end. I thank you.
I thank the
debate on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the mandate on children in armed conflict. We also we thank Mr. Andre Raymond for his valuable briefing today. Madam President, this meeting by armed conflict. The report mandate was established, reflecting an increase of approximately 7% compared to the previous year. These children continue to bear the brunt of hostilities and continue to be deprived of humanitarian assistance and basic services, the disruption of education, exposure to national efforts to place the protection of children at the heart of conflict prevention and peace building. The Kingdom of Bahrain. And protection and increase their vulnerability to exploitation and multiple instances of recruitment. Madam President, strategic investment in conflict prevention and in post-conflict reconstruction and in protecting future generations from further cycles of UNESCO estimates that 273 million children and young people are out of school globally. This further underscores that protecting education during crises and conflicts remains an urgent priority that cannot be deferred to a later date. The Kingdom of Bahrain emphasizes the importance of respecting international humanitarian law and international human also affirms the importance of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and its optional protocol on the involvement of children in armed conflict. These are two fundamental frameworks for strengthening the protection of children the 33rd Arab Summit. This initiative aims at providing educational services to those affected by conflicts in the region and is in cooperation with the League of Arab States and UNESCO. But now extends into the digital sphere. As we note, the growing risks of online recruitment and exploitation on the Child Protection in Cyberspace Unit at Bahrain's Ministry of Interior plays an important role in strengthening national prevention against cyber threats and crimes and promoting awareness of the safe use of the existing commitments into practical measures that enhance prevention and support reintegration and build sustainable peace. I thank you.
Microphone for the president.
Pan International's Mr. Raymond for their briefings. this morning. President, I will make 3 points. First, the scale of grave violations and abuses against children in armed conflict against Israeli children. The impact of the conflict in Gaza on children is a moral outrage. It is also deeply concerning that in Ukraine, Russia continues its attacks against civilians, including children, against critical infrastructure, and refuses to return over 20,000 forcibly deported Ukrainian children. We call on all parties to cease grave violations against children and to comply fully with their obligations under international education, providing millions of children with critical education and psychosocial support. We call on all parties to refrain from deliberate or indiscriminate attacks on schools and to fully implement the Safe Schools Declaration. And we call on those who have yet to endorse it to do so. Third, tackling sexual violence against children in conflict, which disproportionately affects girls, is essential. From South The United Kingdom will continue to champion the rights of child survivors, child witnesses, and children born of rape in war. Improving prevention and protection of children from sexual violence the United Kingdom remains steadfast in our commitment to the Children and Armed Conflict mandate. We call on all listed parties to engage constructively with the United Nations and the Special Representative to agree and implement action plans in order to end
the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement. And I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Colombia. Excellencies, today there are children that do not have a plate of food on the table. There are children orphaned because they have lost their parents and they are facing a life of loneliness. There are children that cannot go to school children who are being deprived of the possibility of growing, learning, dreaming, and becoming fully who they are called to be. Behind or to destroy children we're not just failing those boys and girls, we are compromising the future of all humanity. New responses for coexistence amongst peoples. That person who helps heal divisions, that person who contributes to building more just and peaceful societies. Each child has a sacred and irreplaceable value, and that is why protect of the Secretary General for Children in Armed Conflict, Ms. Vanessa Fraser, and the Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Catherine Russell, as well as the Regional Director of Plan International in Haiti, Mr. Andre Prosperi Raymond, for their statements. Today, more than ever, we should give visibility to boys, girls, and adolescents. We have as adults to put aside our differences so that they can grow, learn, and develop in peace. In the face of Secretary General's report for 2025, our response should be coordinated and adopt a global perspective. We must address the structural causes of this by taking into account historic conditions of exclusion and lack of opportunities, as well as multiple crises, including the more intense impacts of climate change that continue to feed conflict scenarios, as well as violence and insecurity. Sustainable peace depends on comprehensive protection for children as a basic and not negotiable principle. This commitment also depends on going back to basics of children and civilian infrastructure. Schools and hospitals that should be safe spaces for children continue to be targeted by strikes, which limits the future and opportunities for new generations. This is why the government of Colombia created an agency for interinstitutional coordination that promotes the incorporation of and compliance protection and anticipation strategies in the face of possible attacks against schools. And this is proof of how the architecture to protect children in conflict is a powerful and useful tool. The Secretary General's report registers over 13,000 cases of children formerly associated to armed groups It is a source of concern that this very same report also points out that state forces have been responsible for the greatest number of grave violations registered during the last year. That is why Colombia would like to strongly boys, girls, and adolescents in the framework of armed conflicts. A dramatic example of that situation is the occupied Palestinian territory, the place in the world with the highest number of registered grave violations, most of them attributed to the Israeli Defense Forces. Moreover, various of security excuse could possibly justify shooting in cold blood a child or a baby just a few months old. What we see is the consequence of the same kind of systematic what else is necessary to recognize the genocidal intention of the government of Israel that is behind these actions and to act in consequence? On the other hand, to that path due to a lack of opportunities. Hundreds of schools remain closed. Access to education and other basic services for minors is extremely limited. And behind these numbers, there are girls and boys that live in fear, whose education has been interrupted, and who on a daily basis face risks that no minor should ever have to experience. To support the Haitian people and to overcome this multidimensional crisis. Today, we would have liked to directly hear from the voices of Haitian children and youth. The lack of security community cannot abandon them. 30 years after the creation of the mandate entrusted by this council, we should continue advocating for the maintenance of follow-up and monitoring mechanisms, the effective implementation of the agenda, and its adaptation in the face of new challenges, such as the use of new technologies in conflicts, and this includes different applications of AI technologies. New technologies should contribute to well-being, but they are being used for destruction, commit grave violations, be it the use of drones that indiscriminately strike targets, or the use of campaigns to recruit minors, is an urgent issue that requires our attention and immediate action. Adolescents and youth constitutes a priority for the Colombian state and is grounded in a legal, constitutional, and international framework that recognizes the primacy of their rights. In 2024, Colombia, along with international partners, organized the first World Ministerial Conference to End Violence Against Children that mobilized specific commitments on protected children and youth who are loved and who have opportunities. And on the basis of this approach, we recognize that health, education, and protection in the face of violence are interdependent dimensions that ensure integral development as well as the creation of a life that is free, safe, Colombia's experience has taught us that lasting peace can only be built when children are protected, when their rights and access to services are ensured, and when they have opportunities to develop to their full potential, living with dignity, learning, participating, and growing up in to grow up free from fear, violence, and war. A generation that deserves Thank you. I resume my function as Security Council President.
Hamas is a terrorist organization willing to use civilians, including children, as human shields. We strongly condemn Hamas's actions
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I wish to remind the flashing light on the microphone will prompt speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 3 minutes. I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
We have witnessed a continued and alarming rise in verified grave violations against children in situations of armed conflict. While this increase highlights the urgent and renewed call to action, we highlight that protecting schools and access to education are critical and preventative measures that not only the MRM forms the backbone of efforts to end, prevent, and respond to all 6 violations against children and hold perpetrators accountable. We underscore the importance of the CAAC agenda as a distinct The agenda must remain independent and impartial. We thank SRSG Fraser for her leadership and welcome her strong advocacy for children affected by armed conflict, including through visits to conflict-affected areas. We highlight the value of the mandate of the SRSG's office monitoring of action plans. We acknowledge and appreciate the critical role within the CAAC agenda of UNICEF, the UN Department of Peace Operations and CSOs, including within the UN country task forces on monitoring and reporting. Conflict has long-term effects on children that are both physical and psychological, and children are uniquely vulnerable. Measures to protect them should recognize this and treat children as agents, not just beneficiaries of care. The views of children and their best interests should be taken into account in all decisions that affect them. We call develop and implement action plans and other concrete time-bound measures to end and prevent grave violations and to protect children affected by armed conflict. Second, we urge all parties to armed conflict to fully comply for all 6 grave violations committed against children through child-sensitive and trauma-informed national and international justice mechanisms, such as the International Criminal Court. We have a collective responsibility to invest greater political capital in securing accountability for grave violations and crimes against children in armed conflict. Fourth, we encourage all UN member states enforcing and implementing practical instruments that can strengthen child protection, such as the Safe Schools Declaration, the Paris Principles and Commitments, the Vancouver Principles, the Explosive Weapons in Populated Areas Declaration, and the Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel. Fifth, we urge the Security Council to regularly convene its working group is now. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Canada for the statement, and I now give the floor to
debate as we mark the 30th anniversary of the Children and Armed Conflict Mandate. I also express my gratitude to Special Representative Vanessa Fraser and UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell, as well as the civil society briefer for their briefings and tireless dedication to the cause. Kazakhstan views the findings of the Secretary General annual report with profound concern. The alarming surge in the killing and maiming of children and the denial of humanitarian access demand our immediate reaction. We invite delegations to support the global initiative to galvanize political commitment to IHL. It is co-funded by Brazil, China, France, Jordan,
South Africa, and my own country, Kazakhstan, and the ICRC, and is now endorsed by 113 countries. Dear colleagues, our focus today on safeguarding educational settings is of paramount importance. Schools must always remain safe and protected spaces. Recurrent attacks on educational facilities, their military utilization, destroy the future of entire generations. Kazakhstan calls to strictly implement Security Council Resolution 2601 and to translate international obligations into verifiable national legislation, prevention mechanisms, and military directives. Our political commitments must be matched by action. Driven by this conviction, Kazakhstan has successfully repatriated hundreds of its children from Syrian conflict zones. Through comprehensive medical, psychological, and social rehabilitation, alongside tailored educational programs, we have ensured their successful reintegration. Kazakhstan stands ready to share these positive practices with the international community. We invite all of you to attend our upcoming side event on Central Asian experiences regarding the prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration of returnees from conflict zones, to be held on July 1st on the sidelines of the UN Counterterrorism Week. Furthermore, we must confront the unique risks posed to children by emerging technologies in modern warfare. The increasing use of artificial intelligence and drones in targeting, alongside the exploitation of social media by armed groups and actors to abduct, extort, and recruit challenges requires robust political will and sustained funding. Severe cuts to humanitarian budgets jeopardize critical child protection, education, reintegration programs that give vulnerable children a safe future for every child. I thank you.
Doy las gracias al
I thank the representative of Kazakhstan, and I now give the floor to the representative of Indonesia. You have the floor.
Madam President, Indonesia thank Colombia for convening the meeting and briefers for their sobering insights. The report of the Secretary General provided an infallible, albeit distressing, overview of the realities children faces in conflict settings. 38,558 violations committed every day. Almost a third of all grave violations recorded in 2025 occurred in the occupied Palestinian territory. The questions before us is simple. Are these numbers becoming the new normal, or are they deemed enough for us to demand urgent actions? Indonesia's answer is clear. They must never become normal. Allow me to highlight long-term recovery to tackle the root causes of vulnerability: poverty, hunger, discriminations, displacement, and the absence of education and equal opportunity. Children affected by armed conflict must be treated with their dignity and future placed at the center. This is particularly urgent in Gaza, where children continue to face violence, hunger, displacement, and collapse of safe learning spaces. In 2025 alone, the UN verified over 8,000 incidents of impeded humanitarian access. Another untreated injury, and potentially another life lost. All parties must comply with international humanitarian law and allow safe, rapid, sustained, and unhindered into battlegrounds. We are deeply alarmed by the growing use of technologies and artificial intelligence in military operations, which risk making the use of force must be protected. Humanitarian workers must be protected, and those responsible must be held accountable. Madam President, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Children and Armed Conflicts as just another statistic, but as the moment that the international community decided that enough is enough. Let us choose action over indifference, accountability over impunity, and hope over despair. I thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, Germany aligns itself with a statement by the Group of Friends of Children in Armed Conflict and the one to be delivered by the European Union. I would like to thank the Colombian presidency for convening this critical debate, and we express our gratitude to Special Representative Vanessa Fraser and the Executive We remain deeply concerned by Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine, which continues to strip Ukrainian children of their safety, their education, and their futures through grave violations against children's especially in Gaza and the West Bank. The sheer scale of reported cases is unbearable. We urge all parties to the conflict to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and to implement measures to ensure the protection of civilians, especially children. We're also alarmed by the deteriorating situation of children in the DRC, in Nigeria, in Myanmar, Somalia, and Sudan, and regrettably, these crises respond on early warning. We must strengthen early warning mechanisms that integrate child-specific risk indicators, such as school closures and weapon contamination, to allow for prevention before vulnerabilities escalate. Second, accountability. Peace is unsustainable without justice, and long-term stability cannot be achieved when perpetrators act with impunity. Strengthening national and international judicial systems, such as the International is only the beginning. We must adopt a holistic approach that guarantees medical care, psychosocial support, and age and gender-sensitive reintegration programs. Madam President, reversing this deeply concerning trend requires our renewed collective efforts, full adherence to international law, and an unyielding commitment to hold perpetrators
give the floor to the representative of Brazil. You have the floor. Madam President, I would like to thank the briefers for their valuable contributions and congratulate the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflicts, Ambassador acts, accidental or deliberate, against schools and other educational facilities. When a school is attacked, at a minimum, traumatized children lose access to education, safety, support networks, and therefore, in the long term, their very future. But often they pay with their lives or are mutilated. This is a stain on our human consciousness, and it violates the most basic norms of IHL and civilization. The consequences can be lasting and even affect the following generations. Interrupting education heightens their vulnerability to displacement, exploitation, parties in armed conflicts to never put at risk schools or educational facilities and to ensure their protection in ceasefire agreements and all commitments related to conflict. They must comply unconditionally with their obligations in light of IHL, especially those relating Madam President, the Secretary General has reminded us that children continue to bear the brunt of wars that they do not cause or continue. The situation in Gaza is specifically alarming, with grave violations attributed to the Israeli armed forces, and this includes an absurd number of children that have been murdered, mutilated, and detained. There consequences are especially damaging and potentially permanent. In Sudan, millions of children have seen their childhood and future snatched away by violence, hunger, and disease. In both cases, schools and hospitals have been severely affected. It is also deeply concerning to see this situation in other conflict zones where girls and boys see that their rights, beginning by access to education, reports on attacks against schools and violations against children in order to enhance prevention, accountability, and an effective response. And we must support children that have been linked to armed groups in order to sustainably reintegrate them and make sure that they are not recruited again. Of the campaign Prove It Matters, Brazil reaffirms its firm commitment to the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Agenda on Children and Armed Conflicts. I thank you. I thank the representative of Brazil for his statement. I give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Jainaba Janye.
I'm honored to join you this afternoon on this open debate for the first time in my capacity as the African Union Special Envoy for Children Affected by Armed Conflict. I thank Colombia and the civil society organizations for their continued leadership. Madam President, the African Union's central message is clear. Education must remain protected in situations of armed conflict because schools are not only places of learning, they're spaces of safety, recovery, and has reiterated the need to domesticate and implement the Safe Schools Declaration. The AUPSC has called for the protection of schools, teachers, and learners from hostilities subside. The protection of children does not end with their release. It requires sustained investment in recovery, reintegration, and psychosocial support, education, and community-based care. Again, education is central to this process, and we should ensure that it is mandatory in refugee, IDP, and settlement camps. Actors must therefore focus on preventing online recruitment and exploitation, protecting children from digital harms, and strengthening accountability. The Peace and Security Council has provided a political follow-up pathway for the CAC agenda. Through my office as Special Envoy, the AU will continue to work with partners to ensure that the Continental CAC agenda delivers measurable protection outcomes for children. Madam President, I conclude by emphasizing that children affected by armed conflict do not need another declaration of concern. They need systems that protect them, laws that are enforced, schools that remain safe, peace processes that deliver for them, and recovery support that enables them to rebuild their lives. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Jiang Mei for her statement. There's still a number of speakers inscribed on our speakers list.